a traditional AMI torture session, isn't it? I think we're all enjoying it, must be sadistic.
I'm in charge, we're gonna be at the Thai restaurant for dinner across the street at the Travel Lodge. And I'm in charge of the alcohol, because it's bring your own booze. How many people, if you're coming, raise your hand if you're a red wine drinker. If that's your main.
Doesn't matter for me.
Yeah.
Okay,
Either
thank you, got it. White wine, rosé, cheap American beer. Jamie calls that girly beer. Who wants that IPA Guinness stout beer? Stout beer. Who
Yeah.
wants stout? Two stouts. You got two stouts.
What pairs well with Thai?
What?
What pairs well with Thai?
Very well, you gotta educate me. I don't know that. Okay, I've got a sense of.
Do they have hard
Okay, so will all speakers come up the front and we'll try and just blast through things while we're all still awake. Okay, well, I've made some notes from all of the talks as maybe speaking points or talking points. First of all, John Howell's excellent presentation on how the present banking system works, and the alternative. And some points are sovereign money enables the money supply to adjust with changes in the economy without causing a recession or a depression, which I think is a very important point that we can look to expand on, especially compared to what happens with the banking system. Something that may cause banks to panic and then call in loans, and then that just precipitates a snowballing effect. And that wouldn't really happen with a stable money system so much anyway, because the loanable funds component of the whole money supply would just be a subset of the money supply, rather than now where basically the whole money supply is created as loans. So, and another thing is that we don't need to keep having bank crashes, which is basically the same point. And I really liked the slide with the present system that had the banks on top as very symbolic, because it really shows that they are in control of the economy. And then on the need for taxes, I agree with John that we still do need taxes. I know that there's some that think that we could do away with taxes, but I think you need some sort of reflux system, as they call it. But of course, the type of taxes could change. It could be, like Henry George land tax, might be a fairer tax system. There's various types of tax systems, or it could be user fees, if you don't want to call it tax. User fees for public services, all sorts of options. And in the long run, we need to have a steady state, so that in the long run that probably would create a balanced budget and a steady state economy. So the amount of money going out and the amount of money coming in are pretty much balanced, because the economy is pretty much steady. And also, it addresses the concentration of wealth, because it's pretty obvious that if you've got a lot of wealth and a lot of money behind you, you're a good customer for a bank for making a loan. So that's where the money's going to go. The money creation is going to go to the top. With the NEED Act anyway, it's distributed basically on a per capita basis to the local communities and even with the initial citizen still on an individual basis. Now, an important point was raised was, is monetary reform enough? Do we need other reforms? And I think my sense of the consensus of the room was that, yes, I think everyone acknowledges that we do need other reforms to accompany monetary reform, but monetary reform is like a keystone reform. When I was visiting New Zealand earlier this year, I went to a documentary film festival and they had a film called Serengeti Rules. It was about the story of some biologists that have been studying ecosystems, and they found that if there was a species that was removed, which they called a keystone species, then the whole ecosystem would collapse. So I think we could say that monetary reform is like a keystone reform. Now, do we need? Okay, Howard raised the question that often comes up: will businesses have access to sufficient credit? And then also, we need to do we need to think about being more explicit about credit guidance for what loans from, say, the revolving fund are used for, or even what banks are allowed to loan on totally, even with their own funds or their investors' funds. At the moment, from the research that Positive Money did, they found that only about 10% of bank loans was actually going into small and medium businesses. The vast majority was going into asset price inflation, whether it be real estate or stocks and bonds and things like that. And I'm pretty sure that's probably the case in the US as well. We don't have such easily accessible statistics, although Mark Pash found some statistics a while back. And then the question came, even if we did have credit guidance rules, could they be enforced? Like, who's to stop someone initially getting a loan from the revolving fund or from a bank, and then on lending it through a special purpose vehicle for some nefarious reason? Could you really enforce that? So basically, the conclusion was that we need regulations. Some of these issues can just be dealt with regulations and enforcement of the regulations, obviously. Geraldine raised the point of smaller banks and more localised lending. So they tend not to be involved in big mergers and acquisitions. Like the Wall Street banks, they tend to be more sort of bread and butter loans for starting up a business or buying a new piece of equipment for a business, things like that. That's actually something real often. And Sue asked about what are the implications of the big banks having most of the money because they've got the big customer base. And yeah, they still will have quite a bit of clout, even if they're not creating the money. They'll still be, because of their customer base, they'll have a big base of people placing money with them on lending, and so they still will have quite some influence. So maybe, again, the credit guidance rules have to come in. And Steve talked about Pennsylvania and lending rather than spending, which is also what Nick Tiedemann has been proposing since the 2013 Cooper Union event we did. And he's going to be talking about that again. He's presented pretty much the same thing every AMI conference since then, and I think it's something that could be done within the NEED Act. It's not something that it's like basically when I first read his paper at the Cooper Union, I immediately saw that this was like a way of introducing a citizen's dividend or a universal basic income by stealth, by making it like a lifetime loan, and then you just repay the loan out of your estate when you die. And Nick says, well, if your estate's doesn't cover the loan, well, too bad, you know. So, now Steve Walsh was talking about Pennsylvania and that there was no taxes, but I think the consensus of the room was that, in effect, the interest on those loans from the Pennsylvania Assembly was the tax. You know, the interest was in lieu of the tax.
Yeah, it was revenue for the government.
Yeah, yeah. And there was also mention, again, that some of our colleagues want less tax, like Mark Young, I think, was mentioned. And lending could be a way of being a more responsive way of adjusting the money supply, because you can adjust the amount you lend or repayment schedule, whereas it's quite cumbersome to change tax rates, you know, up and down all the time. And that's one of Nick Teeman's arguments. And so we'll be hearing from Nick on Saturday morning.
Joe's back.
Joe stand. He's talking about make that. I want to get.
Okay, it's okay. The government's budget is approximately 20% annually of the economy right now, today. Should be 25 right now. Okay, so the government's budget is 25% of the economy, and we failed 20% of the economy. And if the growth of the economy, which would be funded by new money creation, additional money to the economy, is in the neighborhood of 2 to 3%. So there's a seniorage gain to the government's budget of the 2 to 3%. I don't see how the other 17% cannot be in the collection of taxes. Just simple as that. So in other words, I'm of the opinion that we will continue to fund the government through taxation, even after monetary reform.
I would not argue with that.
No, I haven't got to the bottom of what Mark Young wrote a paper, and I got through about half of it, and I still haven't finished the other half of it, so I haven't found out how that works yet. But, okay, so I think also when Steve Walsh was talking about the Pennsylvania system, it was primarily, Steve, if I'm correct, they were lending for productive purposes, like for. So the idea there is that the producer sells the produce, and that enables them to get the income to repay the loan.
Yes.
Yeah. And John mentioned that that was a growth era. You know, that was when the colonial period was when, you know, the frontier was being expanded, whereas now we're in an era where we need to stabilise or even reduce our footprint and our output. And one, just as an aside, when reference was made to the IMF paper, the Chicago Plan Revisited, and it said that the output would increase by 10%, that doesn't necessarily mean that there'd be more 10% more stuff produced. It could also mean that the same amount of stuff is produced, but it is produced more efficiently. You get more output for the same amount of input. So that's another way of looking at it, is that it makes the economy more efficient, which is, I think, a good thing. And so that could be a different way, because a lot of people would look at our increasing output by 10% and say, oh, we can't do that. You know, we've got to stop. We've got to stop the output. But you could look at it the other way and say, we can have the same output, but with less input. With, what would it be, 91% of the input? Something like that, if you do the math. Okay, so Nick Ignatz, just a few points that came to mind. Money is a necessity, and none of what people think about money is true now. Basically, what we're proposing is what everyone thinks we've got now. And Nick's made that point, in his publications very well. And the results of the Fed are not good due to money being debt. And one of the obvious things about that is the inequality that it creates or causes. I would argue. We have to be in debt for there to be any money at all. I mean, when you think about it, it's just so mind-blowing. I think that's one of the big hurdles that people have in understanding the present system is that they can't understand how you need to have a debt to have money. It sort of is counterintuitive. So coins are the only real money in the present system, and then that was reprised again later on. And see, the NEED Act doesn't do anything to the US coins because nothing needs to be done to them. But they already are US money. Okay, so monetary reform is social justice, so we like that. And can we have a democracy with an undemocratic money system? That's a really good question to ask.
Answer is no.
That's what democracy is. We should have democratic
The
money.
concentration of wealth concentrates power, and that is inimical to democracy.
Yeah.
Even if the bankers are good people.
Even if because it's the system, it's not.
All right, I'm going to go to the Q&A. I'm just going through these points. I've just noted them down. I'll probably, maybe if I'm in the mood, I'll type them up because I think that they're really good talking points,
Yeah. Well, maybe you could continue tomorrow morning. Because in case maybe we have a little Q&A in here, and go back and forth. And if it gets slow and it's only 11 o'clock, you can talk some more, Jim. Questions, anybody, for this illustrious panel? Sue, I'm counting on you. Come on, someone raise their hand.
I didn't have a question really, just a comment, because I sort of think the taxes thing was maybe directed at me. Because I see two reasons for taxes. One is to tax excess money, should that occur, out of the economy, and the other one would be for the basic running of government, not to fund public projects. Because this is the way I define money. Sovereign money is a public credit, and it's taken from Huber and somebody else. Anyway, sovereign money is the public credit put in the public account in exchange for a promise of the public to be productive, build a road, whatever, and a promise by the government to keep control of the money. So that little ticket, the sovereign money that's entered into the circulation, is for the productive desires and agreement of the public to build something. The taxes are for running the federal government. The state government has its own thing. Anyway, that was my point.
Hey, I have a joke.
Are we at that time?
We can get rid of taxes and still control the volume of money in relation to what we need by, instead of taxing people, encouraging them to go out and have babies.
Okay, population growth.
Population growth.
I have a question. I know the panelists just answer the question, I'm asking. Jerry, I have a question for you. And the question is something that you said in the discussion of when I was talking. Because I had raised this question about whether or not monetary reform itself would influence this concentration of wealth. And Howard answered first, and he said the way this would do that is that banks would not have the same resources to be able to fund corporate mergers and large corporations, if I understood your comment correctly. then you said something else which was, I thought, good too, and I can't remember. Do you remember what it was?
The redistribution of wealth, because whenever somebody gets foreclosed on, he loses his house to the bank and it moves up. And it's a continual process since, 1800. It's always been, and that's why the wealth keeps moving up. So.
And when they stop lending on purpose, then it's a massive transfer.
Yeah, right. And it's usually a lot of times by sector, but yeah, it's a massive, can be huge.
Yeah. Like
I always like-
800,000 houses.
I like the way that Michael Hudson put it. It's the asset stripping phase of the economy.
Right.
Yeah, that's pretty good.
Questions?
Sandy, Mike finally.
So I was wondering about your opinion on the sort of ebb and flow of monetary policy awareness and activism in American society. It used to be the case, around the turn of the century that the populist movement was very involved and knowledgeable about monetary policy issues. And it sounds like as well, during the 1940s as well, people had an awareness of monetary policy and its importance for, a cohesive and sustainable economic system. So it seems to, again, ebb and flow, and I was wondering your opinions on why that's happening, if it's a deliberate effort to obscure, critical historical facts and understanding of the monetary system and its relation to the overall economic system and things like wealth inequality. And do you see maybe it ebb and flowing again in the future where people might have a better understanding and awareness of it and therefore be more active about it in the future?
This is going. Good question. The original monetary policy, I suppose, was trying to control the quantity of money, and then they moved away from that when they found that they couldn't control the money, because guess what? They weren't issuing the money; it was the banks that were creating the money. So then they moved the policy to interest rates, and they tried to pretend that if they increase the interest rates that banks have to pay, then that will somehow channel through to the interest rates that banks charge, and that'll cause people to either not borrow so much or borrow more. But it's very, very tentative. It's basically, there has been studies done, there's been academic papers published showing that more often than not, the exact opposite result happens, counter to what the theory says. And Richard Werner has actually developed a thesis, I suppose you could call it, that actually if you increase interest rates, it causes an increase in inflation because through a variety of mechanisms. One being that it increases the price of everything. People have to recover more of their prices of what they sell to be able to cover the higher interest bill. So and it's amazing that people have not figured out that the central bank pushing the interest rate up and down, why are they trying to do that to control the money supply? It should be obvious that they're not controlling the money supply if they're just trying to influence it. So who is controlling the money supply? But people don't seem to ask that question.
Yeah, I was thinking in answer to your question, Mike, that people who enjoy the security of privilege seldom ask questions that might make that uncomfortable. So it's obvious that these questions are not going to come from the financial sector, which are unless they begin to feel threatened. And of course, what drove essentially the interest back in the late 1800s and that is that people were threatened. Farmers were threatened in terms of their inability to get the money they needed to be able to operate. So when people feel threatened, they get an interest in something. Whether or not, if the system deteriorates now into another crash that becomes really serious, whether or not the public can be educated into realizing that that has something to do with the monetary system, because they'll think of all other things to blame it on, not necessarily the monetary system. So the task is in front of us to essentially get this conversation out in terms of how the monetary system works and its effect and its consequences and the risks that it has for us. But it won't come from the financial sector unless they start to hurt, and that may eventually occur.
Is this the last question before we?
Yes. I just wanted to say something in response to Mike's. Anyway, I get it, Mike.
And while we're waiting, I'm just gonna give Mike the answer to his question, yes.
Some groups are really interest rate sensitive, like home builders, so those groups watch it real closely. So I think in some portions of the economy, they do pay very close attention to monetary policy. Some people are really interested in employment also. They think that the Fed can impact employment. So there are a bunch of groups that do try to understand the Fed. Not sure how easy it is to understand, what all their moves are going to produce. And we talked about that earlier. Sometimes it's hard to determine what the effects will be.
Sometimes the real monetary question, the real significant question of monetary policy has nothing to do with interest rates. It has to do with who creates the money and how is it created.
The monetary policy discussion has been shifted from money creation to interest rate setting.
I couldn't hear you, Mike.
In the mainstream economic, discussion, it has shifted away from money creation to interest rate setting.
Yeah.
It's a deliberate obfuscation of the critical parameter.
I'm not even sure it's deliberate. I talked to my president of my local bank who denied that he creates money when he creates loans. I don't think he's a dishonest guy. I don't think he deliberately was misleading. He really didn't know. It's astonishing to know that he didn't know what he was doing. But I think that's in fact what happens largely. I think maybe the bankers on top know damn well, but I think the people in local banking don't.
That's right.
Central bankers.
Upton Sinclair pointed it out. If anybody gets paid for not knowing something, they're going to not know it.
If your salary depends on not understanding, it's hard to understand.
Right.
It's
And also on
7:30 on
interest
the
rates.
first night, should we get to dinner?
Get to dinner, yes.
I try to quit.
We're about an hour after Stephen would want it, so let's, in honor of Stephen.
I second that.
Okay, well, thanks everybody.
All right.
I just wanted to prove that I was really listening to all of this talk.
You did prove that.
You gave me a hand on that.
What time do you want to be paying attention?
9 a.m. tomorrow, and try and make it, 9 sharp.
All right.
Jamie, will it be hot water or tea?
No.